So now we are going to continue with Hamado SAWADOGO. He is an agricultural researcher at the... You have the floor.
Merci.
Thank you.
Je voudrais joindre ma parole
I would like to reflect and thank all of the previous speakers, and I would like to thank the organizers for giving me a specific task on the work in Africa, because oftentimes the work that has been done, well, Africa is not taken into account as such. So for once, we've had a look at Africa, and we're very happy about this. I would like to thank the committee for that. Since this morning, we've been talking about climate change and how it impacts everyone. But those who pollute the less are the ones who suffer the most, as Dr. Yang has shown. So I'm going to show you the adaptation practices to adapt to climate change in the Sahel area, and I will tell you about the challenges and outlooks. Of course, we can look at the adaptation practices and the challenges to implement them. The Sahel environment is in constant deterioration. Because of climate change, we've observed a significant erosion of the Sahel, strong storms, violent storms, and recurring droughts, which makes it difficult for people to seek food. So the scientific community has a consensus on several points. So there are more violent rains, there are more frequent droughts, there's a decrease and a poor distribution of rain. And an increase in temperatures that has been shown earlier. So let me show you an evolution of rains in Burkina Faso for this area. You can see that in blue you have the ISO Hayat for the decade until the 1970s. We see that it's the case. For the Sahel, in pink, we've seen that it has changed. But even more, the frequency in these droughts has an impact on the work of agricultures and farmers. We've noticed that the critical consequence of climate change is the number, is the yields in production. We had assessed that there was 268,000 tons of cereals that were lost in the country in Burkina. This is a catastrophe. So it's worth 35 billion. So I think it's 112 million euros, $146 million. So it's a huge loss for people trying to have food safety. So we see that farmers are vulnerable. They have several problems that they're faced with at once. We've seen that there's water scarcity, there's a lack of rain, there are recurring conflicts over resources and endemic poverty. Climate change has an impact on all of the aspects of development. So that's about desertification. I'm not going to go over this. So there are, there's an impact on production, on water resources, and it's a vicious cycle.
Je voudrais présenter ici une dégradation
Here, this is a typical deterioration of soil.
qu'on appelle en langue locale morée les zipelles.
We call it zipella
Qu'est-ce que ça veut
in
dire?
local language, in
C'est
Moray.
des plages
What does it
où
mean?
des clairières
Well, it's a meadow where nothing grows. It's an area where nothing grows. This is August, which is the time of the year where we're supposed to get the most rain in Burkina.
avec les ailes. Mais sans travail,
The green area is where we've worked.
lorsque vous
But if you don't work on the soil, nothing happens. If we look at
ça veut dire c'est des clairières divisées, c'est l'horizon,
crops,
c'est l'érosion qui a fait son effet.
you can see
Est totalement décapé et ne
that
reste
the
que des
horizon is completely bare.
Comment on peut donc récupérer donc ces zipelles-là.
So we have a really hard time trying to grow anything back on these zipella.
Une dégradation des terres qui entraîne une
There's a deterioration of soil that creates
sociétés,
a disorganization of societies because of the
bref, des gens qui
lack of income and solutions.
les conditions sont devenues extrêmes et
These are extreme conditions.
mais grâce aux efforts
And thanks to the efforts of producers, NGOs, agriculture, farmers, associations, there are many practices
en place
that have been implemented,
elles permettent de s'adapter au changement climatique.
and they allow us to get used to climate change.
Puisque centenaire, c'est l'utilisation de la matière,
So we use organic matter. That's a secular practice.
la fumure organique, le
So
fumier,
we use
ou comme la
manure
que nous promouvons. Et
and
on constate que
mulching.
ceci
That's part of the FAIR project that we contribute to. And we notice that this has an impact on yields.
pour un terrain sans fumure, si vous voyez en
So this is a land without the use of manure. If you put 2.5 tons, you have 600.
5 tonnes,
And if you put 5 tons, you have about
il y a une augmentation donc,
800. So there's an increase
rendement des cultures.
in the yields of crops if we use organic matter.
C'est les cordons
The other ways to do that is to have stone
c'est
cords.
ce dispositif qui permet
This
encore de rendre cultivable
allows to make half
les terres de la moitié nord du Burkina
of lands in the
Faso.
country
Avait affecté une bonne
arable.
Qu'est-ce que ce sont donc des dispositifs qui ont été adaptés
These
à
are
ce que les paysans
schemes
connaissaient
that
et
have
c'est
been
un
adapted
alignement
because
des
it's what
terres
farmers used to
où
do.
on creuse
So we
des terres
dig
parallèlement au sens du
and
ruissellement
we
des eaux.
put waters in, parallelly to
Et ça permet donc,
water streams,
de cultiver.
and it
Les
allows
familles
for
formées peuvent
crops.
facilement arriver à mettre en
It's
place.
easy
Mais
to
bien sûr,
train
avec la
people
main-d'œuvre,
to
parce que
this
c'est ça, ils ont
practice,
investir.
and it requires
Vous avez
manpower
donc, une image,
to
donc,
implement. Here's an image
tirée,
of the use of these stone
ou bien après la
cords
pluie. Mais pour renforcer ces cordons tirés, on
following
utilise
the rain,
également
but to
la
strengthen
forte
these
des qui
stone
permettent de
cords,
stabiliser
we
les
also
pieds ou de
use
bandes enherbées et avec différentes
hedges and grass.
Voilà. L'autre technique qui est la plus prisée au
There's
Burkina
another
actuellement,
technique
c'est
that
le
is
zai.
widely used in
Vraiment
Burkina
une connaissance
Faso. It's
qu'on a
zai.
au bout du jour.
It's
Et
a
comme le docteur
it's a
Théodore
local
le disait,
knowledge
c'est
that
pas
we
seulement,
recovered,
une pratique.
and it's not only a practice; it's a whole philosophy.
En langue
Because
nationale,
zai
signifie,
in
en
the
fait,
national language means
se dépêcher pour faire
hurrying, rushing to do something.
rapidement.
Do it
Appliquer au
quickly.
domaine agricole, c'est
When
dans
we
le
apply it
sens
to
de
farming,
anticiper.
it means that we anticipate.
20 à 30 centimètres.
We dig 20 to 30 centimeters in diameter.
On y applique la matière organique.
We put the organic matter in there, and we wait for the rain
Ça veut dire que, bon,
to
pour le producteur, faut pas être
seed.
paresseux, faut
This means
préparer
that farmers
la
must not
campagne
be
à l'avance.
lazy. They need to prepare their soil in advance. So when using zai, yields go from 900 to 1,200 kilos.
De zéro, si c'est des IP là.
So it's 0 if it's zipila, and 400 hectares if it's a usual arable land.
Je présente ici donc un paysan célèbre avec
Here,
lequel nous
this
avons
is
travaillé,
a
c'est Yakuba
famous
Sawadogo.
farmer that we've worked with, Sawadogo.
C'est le zai agricole. On a travaillé avec lui
We've
dans le
worked
cadre
with him
d'associations
within the
pour
framework of
voir
associations
comment améliorer la
to see how we can improve
remplaçant les médés,
land production.
des buts.
It's really an experience that allows us to regenerate soil. That's farming zai, and there's also forest zai, which allows us to bring back trees in lands. That's very important because it's interesting. It would be interesting for farmers to have access to the Green Climate Fund, because all of this allows to adapt to climate change easily.
Ici, c'est un peu la forêt
This is the forest in Yakuba Sawadogo's land, who passed away in December. But he shows that we can recover an arable land in an arid area where we thought that it would be impossible. I wanted to show this image because he struggled with land rights, but with NGOs, human rights organizations, the governmental authorities gave him an ownership, a land document to recover these lands. So they have challenges. We need to grow trees and make them safe. So here, for instance, it's only in the forest. So it required the intervention of several people, but most of them, it required about 20 people. I would also like to present the half moons. Those are called big zai. It's also a type of work that is in parallel to the water stream, and they allow to collect water and produce crops. It's very useful to recover zipela. Here we have an image of half moons at the time of harvest. Women often adopt this system because they have smaller lands, so they have much smaller half moons, but they are nonetheless useful and efficient. From my point of view, it's the best adaptation way, the best way to adapt to climate change. Everything they bring here brings back organic matter, allows for biological activity, and allow to do several things at once for animals, humans. So here we're going to show two examples to get back trees from a producer that did zai, but he is not landowner, so he could not plant trees. Baobab is a legendary tree in Africa, for instance, and it solves all problems. And it also brings leaves that are very nutritious, very that have a high iron content. But in the 1980s, there was a strong mortality among baobab trees, and people thought that there were only old baobab, but there's a simple technique, actually, to save them. People were just seeding the baobab seeds as they were seeding their other crops, and when trees grew, they just kept them, which allowed them to use these crops and use these baobab trees, because baobab leaves are very much appreciated in Burkina, and again, it has a high iron content. So that's a farmer to the north of the country who planted baobabs. Rather than having orchards, he chose to grow baobabs for the past 50 years. And it's a very interesting experience because in the area where he is, It is a region where there aren't that many. Now let me show you a few results, research results linked to this. First of all, rain. In reality, it's not so much the amount of rain as how it is distributed. In the case of the practices that we've studied over several seasons in 2018 and 19, the rainfall that we've shown in 2020, for instance, there was slightly more rain, and there were 39 days of rain, so the yields were far higher. So regardless of the practice that we use, either zai or stone cords, it has an impact on yields. So here you see the zai, and you have it, you have the new one to the right and the mature one to the left. This also has an impact on cattle, and it's the same trend because we notice that the big producers use it. And they have, that's also because they have more organic matter. We've seen that using several techniques at once, so this stone cords and zai, allow for a better regeneration of nature. So this is the association of several techniques with little use of mineral fertilizers. In terms of climate change as well, we cannot forget irrigation, because it allows for food safety. It is true that there's drop irrigation, but when we don't have it, we have to make do. So having an enlightened use of resources as regional public goods is a good way to adapt to climate change. As for outlooks, we need to strengthen the capacities of stakeholders and the use of fertilizers and developing technological pacts with farmers. We do co-building and co-concept. We try out things on land. We ask farmers to assess them themselves, and everyone chooses the technique that works best for them. And then we have a feedback session. Then we need to promote systematic integration of cattle raising and agriculture. Give better access to loans, continuing to follow the deterioration indicators and the sustainability indicators. To conclude, there's a positive impact on adaptation practices in the recovery of lands. There's an increase in yields in lands that have been better used. And often, there's more biodiversity in these lands than in other ecological areas that are open to everyone and that continue to deteriorate. If we invest $1 in agroforestry, there will be $13 for the whole society and $6 for agriculture, for farmers. I will finish on this thought. We need to protect and nourish the earth so that it can nourish humans. So this is a picture of Zipela and a good harvest in the Sahel region, hoping that our mamas will have better transportation systems than always having to carry these harvests on their heads. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much for all these examples.
Et on a
And once again, we've received many questions. Let me start with a question linked to the part played by women in adaptation practices in rural areas. Can you tell us concretely how this works? So women play a significant part in adaptation practices in rural areas, but unfortunately, during training, they don't receive the necessary training. Usually, men are trained, and it's often on markets, or they go gold seeking, and women are alone with their land. But when we take women on board with a quick training, they manage to do the stone cords. Women dig with stuff. When we've looked at where the steam runs, women can do everything. Zai, same thing. Women have started to use this technique because even on a small scale, they manage to do Zai even better than men because they're better at maintaining this Zai. I've not had time to show you the pictures. We also have a question on this knowledge transfer from these generations of the legacy of pioneers that you presented. How does this happen? It is true that this is the heart of the problem. If we look at Mr. SAWADOGO, it's an excellent example. But it's just a success story, but we need to multiply experiences and make sure that others have the same. And for instance, in the area, there was what we called innovative farmers. So they would visit other farmers and train the ones who wanted to be trained, and also train other farmers. And they could even work on these fields. And this was to show how people could use Zai and use the stone cord. This is really what needs to be done. It's what we've... it's just one idea. It's not perfect. And they also need to learn from researchers and compare this. And they need to tell us what they like, what they don't like, what works, what doesn't work. I think that these discussions can lead people to continue this, these techniques. We've seen in your discussions that the techniques used are very physical ones. Are there solutions to adapt or make this job easier? You've seen that everything I've presented, you've seen that farmers are working very hard to implement these solutions, these adaptation solutions. There's been funding for the natural resources projects in Sahel. In the 1990s, people had funding, but since decentralization, things have changed. There are other infrastructure that are implemented. Even the mayors running towns and everything, if there's good production, they receive taxes because there's agricultural products on the markets, cattle is going well. So this allows for a better situation for farmers, but also for the whole of society. And we have one last question on the Great Green Wall that is supposed to mitigate some of the impacts of climate change. So according to you, is this part of the needs, practices, or knowledge of farmers in Sahel? So the Great Green Wall, we all had a lot of hope for this. I must admit, unfortunately, we haven't started yet, and the results are not good enough, because we don't see this Great Green Wall from Senegal to Eritrea yet, for several reasons. When we invested a lot of money in this, and the farmers who don't have this money managed to regenerate trees. So there are many things to do.
Dans le principe,
But on principle, it was a good
de faire pour
way
vraiment limiter l'avancée
to limit the advance of
des effets du changement
desertification and mitigate the
de chaleur. De toute façon,
impact of climate change, because if there are trees, there's less heat.
se retrouver sur les arbres parce qu'il y a de l'air qui est plus
People are now leaving their houses to go closer to the trees because there's air and it's more manageable. But I think that we need to reboost that project and allow the people the farmers who want to work to have access to funds.
on a constaté
Because we've noticed every time that when we talk about
politique y recourt chaque année.
planting trees, politicians often talk about it every year to be seen on TV, but actually there's no one maintaining these new forests. And everything we've shown you about farmers, people are working on it. They work really hard. They give it their whole because they want to protect their land. So those are my thoughts on the matter. Thank you so much. Nourishing the earth to nourish humans. Thank you.
Voilà, nous arrivons donc au terme de ce...
We're reaching the end of the second session, and we're now going to have a little bit of a break.